All right, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm good to go.
Okay.
How things been going with you? What you got going on?
Well, let's see how easy this is going to be. I think it'll be easy. Choose me. Cool. Yeah, things are good. We're smoking cigars, talking about the Bible, and in a pretty good summer's day, one might say. So it's going good. What's up with you?
Mostly just work. Yeah, just lots and lots of work. Nutrition's picking up, so I'm busy.
That's good.
Yeah, definitely. I don't like having to find stuff to do throughout the day. I like just having tasks that need to be completed. Doesn't feel productive when you have to like figure out what to do. It doesn't feel as meaningful, I guess, or productive if it just feels like, I guess I could do this, you know.
Definitely. I've like when I was at my old 9-to-5 sales job, it would be like that almost every day. It felt like, and I was just getting so exhausted by it, just mentally draining. But like with what I'm doing now, I've got the next day set up of everything I need to do, hop in, do it. Like I hope my day is going to be full every single time. Like if it needed to be, it would be a 24-hour day of work. Obviously, I can't do that. But once you get that, it's just the most refreshing thing ever.
Yeah, well, especially if you're doing something super fulfilling, like pursuing your own business like you are with something that you actually enjoy doing. I mean, that makes a huge difference if you actually give a shit about what you're doing,
right? Versus
just plugging away at like a 9-to-5.
Yeah. Oh, totally. So what do we have up here? What's cold open?
Yeah, well, there's our cold open done. So I thought it would be fun to start off with a little bit of Ask Cole.
Cool.
Just because it was a fun ending last time. I think this would just be a nice, fun way to start the show. I think here I wanted to pick a romance card because I think that would be pretty fun.
Okay, one of the pinkies.
It
asks very personal questions.
There's a pinky here. Yeah, so just a little bit of background on the game. Jack, why don't you explain it just because you're a little bit more familiar with it than I am.
Yeah, so Ask Cole is actually created by a woman named Ayala, and she is an OnlyFans girl, I believe. And she's, a thinker and maybe intelligent, amongst other things. I'm not certain. It's interesting for those two things to be
interesting dichotomy.
The interesting dichotomy. But, I think, so what this game's about is it asks questions that break down social barriers. So, like, incredibly intimate and deep questions that you would not discuss with people normally. It's not something you probably pull out at Thanksgiving unless you have a very high in trait openness family.
Yeah, maybe a Friendsgiving.
Friendsgiving would probably be a lot more appropriate.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that it could ruin a friendship if the friendship is founded on a house of cards.
Could be. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Love it.
Cool. What do we got?
All right. So from the romance side of things, if you could press a button and double the sex drive of all women on Earth, would you do it?
Fuck yeah.
Yeah, I probably would too. That's not really a difficult question. I mean, that would just make it easier.
I guess let's try to figure out what she's going for there. If it doubled,
I think the issue there would be that just all of the women are now also more promiscuous. So it's not like they only have a higher sex drive with you. It just means that now every woman you run into has probably slept with twice as many men as she would have if you didn't push the button, which...
So it's great if you can find like a girl that's at your hip and like one of you.
It's great if you can find a relationship as soon as sexual interaction becomes a thing.
Yeah.
Like as soon as you hit high school, you meet somebody and it's just like, oh, okay, cool, this is great.
This is what we're doing all the time.
If you're looking at age 30, it might be a little bit more of a detriment. Just because there's been more time.
Yeah, I would say so. Cool.
STDs would probably be a lot higher too. Which
for
St. Louis, that's fucking saying something.
St. Louis has reached its max capacity on all STDs.
We were the chlamydia capital of the U.S. for a while. Might still be.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's interesting that it's like that would happen in a smaller city, as opposed to New York or like highly densely populated areas. We're not very densely populated. We've got a lot of our population spread out.
Yeah, it might just be per capita, and that explains some of the difference. But yeah, less people, even relative to the size, you would think would affect that to a certain degree. I don't know, something about the Midwest is just a little sleazy, I guess.
Yeah, I can see that.
At least that's part of it. It's not the whole Midwest. It's just St. Louis.
It's like where California and New York people go when they want to get away from the big city. They come here. Those bastards.
Get a dirty little weekend in.
Yeah, get a dirty weekend in and get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool. What do we got next?
That's on you.
All right. Let's pull this out. God only knows what's going to be in here. I'm just going to pull out the first thing.
Another romance.
I figured we'd do 2 romances. What percentage of your preferred age, gender, demographic would you be down to have sex with after roughly an hour of flirting? What percentage of your preferred age, gender, demographic would you be down to have sex with after roughly an hour of flirting? I'd have to pull up statistics on everyone that's a healthy body, first of all. In a shape that I'm attracted to. But let's say...
Let's assume it's only people that fit that hole. Or wait, hold on. Let me...
Yeah, go ahead and read it again.
What percentage of your preferred age/gender demographic would you be down to have sex with after roughly an hour of flirting? If you're only taking age and gender demographic into account and nothing else like physical attractiveness, then I don't know, like 10% maybe. Because if you're taking all of that into account and personality, I'd say looks alone are probably going to eliminate at least half.
Yeah.
And then personality, I mean, from my experience here, personality is going to cut out more than half of that half.
Assuming that I'm attracted to all of them, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, assuming I'm attracted to all of them, it probably wouldn't be 100% for me after just an hour of flirting. Just because taking, like, STDs and shit into account, like we were just talking about.
Yeah. My pool is a little bit larger of who I can who I can accept into that, unfortunately, for another time. But a large percentage.
Yeah. Well, I would say, the the whole chlamydia scare kind of turned me off of the casual dating thing. Like, thank fuck I didn't have it. I guess it wouldn't have been that big of a deal if I did have it, because it's just, they gave me the antibiotics anyway, just as a precaution before my results even came back. So it's like, would have been the same shit anyway.
Interesting. Okay.
But still, I don't want to have to go get a bunch of blood drawn again.
Yeah. They pull a lot of blood out of it.
So much blood. They took more blood last time than the first time that I went and got an STD screening. Like, the first time I took it, the vials were about this big, and they filled 3.5. They were about damn near the size of this cigar the last time I went in there, and they took 5. Why did you need so much blood this time?
Isn't one drop do? Can't you just do one drop and figure it out, fill it through there?
You would hope, but no, not at all.
Okay, well, we'll do a couple more of these cards at the end. What do you say we get into the topic of discussion for the day?
Sure, definitely. So just a little background, or I guess preface rather. The idea of the show is just to pick out Bible stories and verses that we think are interesting to us and look at them from a more analytical standpoint rather than a literal historical standpoint, because our shared belief is that the Bible is not a historical document, and we're not meant to believe that any of this stuff actually happened. That's not what the writers had in mind. It's a list of parables, stories that you're meant to take away a lesson from. They're meant to be analyzed. They're meant to teach you things. They're meant to instill moral values within the readers, not make you think that there is actually a man named Jesus that was performing miracles and walking on water 2,000 years ago.
Which that immediately interests me because now it's almost seemed so obvious before, but there are multiple people who wrote the Bible, even the Old Testament.
Yeah.
So to come together and for all of them to be in sync on how to create a story or a book or a writing or scripture that portrays these philosophies and these metaphors and these lessons in life is really interesting that they could come together and do that. I imagine it would just take so much organization, I guess you could say, like
organization, cooperation, ideological cohesion. Like everybody would have to be on the same page.
That's a good way of putting
morally speaking, and not beyond morally speaking, from an action standpoint as well. Not only do they all need to be kind of on the same page as to what sorts of messages they're trying to get across, they also all have to be in the mindset that, we need to get together and make a book about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. That's worth a discussion further on another time after looking into it more.
Definitely, yeah.
So what's the Tower of Babel? Is this the one that you've picked out?
Tower of Babel, yeah. So it's a pretty short one. Pull it open real quick just because one of the lines in it I find particularly funny. So essentially...
Let me, I'm going to preface actually, sorry to cut you off, but
not at all.
For each of these, I think we should have like a key. So when, the word Lord or God is brought up in Scripture, let's say, for me, it's principle, highest moral compass, conscience. That's like so when you hear God or you hear me referencing God, that's what I'm referencing.
Exactly. And yeah. I think my belief is that God is symbolic of your higher moral compass and Satan is representative of your lower moral compass. So every time you have two decisions to make, one is better than the other. If you follow the good option, you are operating under that higher moral compass or following in God's footsteps or whatever. If you do the bad option, you are allowing yourself to succumb to evil or Satan's temptation.
Right.
So I think that's generally what they were trying to get across with the ideas of God and Satan. I don't think it was actually meant to be the man in the sky watching all of us all the time, Sky Daddy, not a thing. And I don't think Satan is actually king of the lake of fire.
Right.
Meant to take in all of the damned and lost souls.
Yep. And so I've got two more here. Heaven, to me, whenever I reference heaven or the kingdom of heaven, it's like peace of mind, presence, love, joy. Like these are the things that I think about when I say heaven. Peace of mind most specifically. Was that similar to you? The same?
Yeah. So I would say the ideas of heaven and hell for me are representative, like you said, peace of mind and just generally general satisfaction, I guess, with your state of being, just being content with what you have and what's going on and being genuinely happy and at peace to your core. Yep. And then hell is just being in a state of misery, being you are not in control of what's going on. You're not happy with what's going on.
Manifestation of any of the 7 deadly sins, envy, all of these things that we hear about. Hell can be put into that on earth in our minds.
Exactly. Yeah. Like hell is a very real place. I don't think that it's meant to be thought of as some place you go when you die to be punished for bad actions. It's just the actual punishment that you will endure in your life if you behave as a shitty person.
All right. And we all will at some point experience hell.
Absolutely.
We have original sin to a certain extent. And, sin being the sins of our father, the sin that we are fallible and that we will absolutely have envy at some point in our lives, or maybe not being grateful for something or not being satisfied. All of these things we're capable of experiencing on earth and will experience at some point.
Absolutely.
And then the last one for me is Jesus. And whenever I think of Jesus, do I think that Jesus walked on water or turned loaves of bread into 5,000? Not necessarily, but really Jesus is the ideal acting out of God.
Yeah, I think the Old Testament set in motion the idea of what operating under The Old Testament gave you the guidelines of how you should behave and how you should follow that higher moral compass and what that looks like. And I think that the New Testament used Jesus as an example of a man that genuinely did that.
Right.
And all of the stories about miracles and great things that he did are just meant to really emphasize the fact that you're capable of great things if you are operating constantly under this higher moral compass, as opposed to allowing yourself to, be envious and gluttonous and wrathful and just shitty, bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. Okay, awesome. So that's like the key that I have. So having said that, now Tower of Babel, what's it about? Why'd you choose the Tower of Babel?
Tower of Babel, yeah. So basically after Noah experienced the flood and, prepared the ark, saved his family, saved all of the animals, and the world was sort of being rebuilt again, at a certain point, a group of people, let's see, all right, a group of people in Shinar, let's see, so people in Shinar began building a tower to heaven, essentially. All of the people spoke the same language, they got along, everything was going fine, and they started building a tower to heaven. God looked at this and said, well, I don't like that. We can't have that happening. If they do this, they'll be able to do literally anything they want. So let's see. God said, and I read it, "Come, let us go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other."
Huh.
Why?
Huh.
Why would you do that? On its face, you read that story and it's like, wow, these people are building a tower to heaven. They're building their way up to this peaceful existence. And God says, no, can't be that easy. We must confuse them and make it more difficult. So I just thought that was interesting on its face because it's Old Testament God being kind of a dick again.
Yeah.
Which he does that.
There goes God being a fucking asshole again.
There goes God in his petulant asshole ways once again. But, being kind of a dick and being very fearful, I think, is, it's important in tribal gods. Back in the day, they did need to maintain order in a very chaotic society where survival was paramount. So maybe God being a little bit harsh and his messages being a bit strongly worded was appropriate for the time, just because life was harsh.
Yeah.
2,000 years ago. But I thought that was really interesting. And my general interpretation of it is just that the path to heaven is not easy. The path to that peaceful life is not easy. Even if you think that you have found a way to easily get there, I feel like at some point a lot of people have felt like, yeah, I've got it all figured out. It probably out of young naivete. I can think of myself feeling like that when I was in my mid to late teens. Yeah, I know what to do. I know what's going on. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're not fine. Even if you think you're fine, eventually your higher moral compass is going to kick in and tell you you're actually not doing enough, bud, and you've still got a lot of work to go. Or at least that was my experience. And so I kind of related to the story in that regard. It's like I thought that I had things figured out. I had this clear-cut path. I'm going to go to college, get this degree, do this job, live this happy life with my girlfriend at the time. We'll eventually get married, have kids. Everything's planned out. I'm good.
It's all going to go perfect.
And then reality at a certain point just kind of sunk in and was like, no, these things and ideas that you have in your head are not going to pan out the way that you think they are. You have chosen wrong, essentially. These things are they're not for you for a multitude of reasons that we don't need to get into specifically. But, generally speaking, I think the idea is just that even if you think that you have figured out the path to heaven, it's most likely not going to be as easy as you think it is going to be. And maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe if you haven't experienced some sort of struggle or trials and tribulations, you aren't really ever going to be able to appreciate that state of bliss that heaven entails. How do you know what heaven is if you've never experienced hell? Everything's neutral.
In order for your branches to extend to heaven, your roots must extend to hell.
Exactly. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? Maybe a little bit of a expansion on the interpretation.
Yeah, well, first let me question you one more point in that. Why do you think they made the distinction to change the languages of people? Why would he change the languages?
That might be, so I did think about that. I think it might be, it might be putting forth the idea that, generally speaking, cooperation between so many people in order to reach that higher standard is just not realistic. People have different moral values. People operate under different moral compasses. People have different beliefs. They exist within different cultures. People don't want the same thing. Peace doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. And finding a group of people that do actually share that exact belief system with you that would get you all to the same heaven might be very difficult to find. So I think that might be one way to interpret it. That one's a little bit more difficult for me than the tower just being kind of, thrown away by God. But I think generally speaking, it just speaks on the idea that it is actually going to be a lot harder than that to just find a bunch of people that have the same goals as you and interpret what heaven would even be in a similar manner as you.
I like that a lot. That makes a lot of sense because they're all choosing one route to heaven. The Tower of Babel is one route, assuming that they can get to the same place from that route. That's interesting. I like that interpretation. I almost wonder what point in the Bible is this? What chapter?
This is early. This is, I think it's Genesis.
Is it Genesis?
Genesis 11. Yeah, it's right after the flood. So
interesting. Okay.
And that's very early on. I mean, that's one of the first couple of stories, the flood.
Yeah, I almost wonder then if it's like exactly what we're talking about. Like, heaven isn't a place that you can get to. There isn't some magical place up in the sky that you can get to. It's almost, to me, it almost seems like this story is like setting the foundation for the kingdom of heaven throughout the rest of the Bible. That hey, this is not a place that you can get to. This is you have to go into a state of mind to reach this, not a tower that's going to take you to this actual place.
Sure, yeah, like as opposed to the idea of literally just aiming for heaven. You actually have to do something. You can't just build a tower to heaven. It's not that simple. You have to figure it out.
Yeah.
And everybody can't just build a tower to heaven because it's not that simple.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then, like you said, the mixing of languages, despite our mixing of languages, we can, and being from different cultures, we can still find heaven. Each and every culture, I imagine, can find heaven in some way.
Yeah.
Across all cultures, even these indigenous tribes, they can find heaven.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even if you're just comparing different religions that existed at the time that they knew about, like Judaism versus Islam, that might be a slight, just indication that, yes, different belief systems are also a way to achieve what we call heaven.
Huh. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Which I think it would be extremely interesting if that was a point that was alluded to so early on in the Bible, at any point in the Bible, but especially so early on, especially considering the fact that modern Christians very often adopt that idea of, we're right and everyone else is wrong and they're all going to hell. Yeah. So I think that it would just be extra hilarious if it actually was meant to be interpreted very early on in the Bible that, no, that's incorrect.
Yeah.
Fuck you.
Yeah, right from the beginning. They're like, hey, guys.
Yeah.
Don't go this way. Whatever you do, don't interpret the Bible this way.
Right, yeah.
Whatever you do, please don't. You'll cause so much damage and chaos in the world.
Yeah, and I really wish that we could get these stories without the 2 millennia of translations.
Right.
Over, translations multiple times over the course of 2,000 years. It would be so great to be able to get these stories just how they were written, word for word, originally. Because I think of passages like the meek shall inherit the earth, right? Which is just one example of a Bible verse that I've heard the actual original phrasing of, or not the original phrase, but what it actually meant, which was more akin to those who have swords but are determined to keep them sheathed shall inherit the earth, which is essentially saying those who are capable of defending themselves and standing up for what's right and defending the people they love and standing up for those people, but don't abuse that capability of strength and power, are the ones who will inherit the earth. That's a lot different than meek.
Yep.
Which is essentially means
a timid little
weak
guy.
and timid.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's.
Yeah. And it's Peterson, and, obviously Peterson says, you should be a monster and learn how to contain it. And then he, read from Jung and Nietzsche, and who Nietzsche said something along the lines of, it's always entertained me how people without claws find themselves to be good. And I love that interpretation.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those warriors in the garden will inherit the earth, not the gardeners that are sent out to fight.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a interesting distinction. They'll inherit the earth and not the kingdom of heaven. If we're all striving for the kingdom of heaven, and if it were a place, why do the meek inherit the earth? Why do they get the earth?
That's a good question. I think it would most likely just be because that is more of... I think that's more of a... I'm struggling to find words today, and I hate it. It's more of a dialogue on actual real-world utility, as opposed to, I guess heaven is in our interpretation of it. I think that it's just really meant to be hammered home that those are the people that are going to function properly within the world, as opposed to those are the ones that are going to attain peace. I think that the meaning behind that specific line is these are the people that are most capable. These are the people that will be in control because they are the most fit to be in control. I don't think that passage specifically has anything to do with the attainment of peace in and of itself. It might evolve further to get to that point. I'm not sure. I haven't read that passage in quite some time. Everybody knows that line.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it was speaking on just that aspect of living. I think it was speaking upon literal control, inheritance. Those are the people that are going to be running shit because those are the people that are capable of doing so.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Anything else on the Tower of Babel?
Not so much.
No. I like that one.
Yeah.
I like that one a lot, especially if it fits into our view of the Bible.
Yeah, and just the I particularly like the multiple religion consideration that we think might be a part of it that I hadn't thought about before we started today.
The beauty of discussion.
The beauty of discussion.
Okay, well, I'll go into mine now if you're cool with that. Then
absolutely.
So I've got the walls of Jericho, or the sacking of Jericho, whatever you want to call it. So I'll prelude this with a few different things. So kind of my frustration with a lot of the interpretation of the Bible is what we've talked about, where people will backtrack to the Old Testament and they'll come up with all of these, not excuses, but the word we were looking for earlier. They'll come up with all these excuses,
rationalizations for their own beliefs.
Rationalizing it, yes, exactly. They're going to rationalize this, and
that was a lot easier than earlier.
Yeah, we finally got the word right.
Only took an hour.
So they come up with these rationalizations, and so this is from thebibleproject.com. And this is kind of them explaining away God's vindictiveness and seemingly cruel nature in the Bible.
Which, before you even get into it, I think it's important to recognize that God in the Bible is, generally speaking, a God of war in a lot of aspects. Like, he is very much a protector of his people. He is very much about instilling qualities within his people that will enable them to protect themselves. So to deny that fact, I think, is not only disingenuous, but also is probably taking away a lot of the utility that there is to be taken away from these stories. If you ignore that aspect of God, the fact that he is capable of anger and strength and almost wrath, definitely wrath.
Conquest, yeah.
Conquest when it is necessary. by the standards of the stories being told. There are situations within the Bible where violence is necessary. I don't think that we should stray away from that idea that occasionally violence, or at least being a little bit more harsh than you typically are, is necessary. Situations like that are going to come up. And I think operating under a moral compass that recognizes that fact, or following a God that believes in that fact, is important.
Yeah.
If you just want to be a capable human being.
And to me, it's just ironic that God has a chosen people at all. Like, I think that's just been wildly misinterpreted in the first place. If it's the God that we, the all loving and all knowing God that we say God is, he wouldn't have chosen people. It would be all humans on earth.
Right. Yeah. Why pick and choose?
Right.
I think maybe the idea behind that is people that are not ascribing to.
And I could get behind that. What you're about to say, I can get behind.
Yeah, it's just people not ascribing to that higher moral compass are damned. But I think that the bastardization comes in whenever people interpret it as they must follow this religion, this idea of God specifically. Like, God's chosen people don't necessarily have to be only the Jews. I think that's probably a misinterpretation. I don't think that the people that wrote the Bible, I mean, we already discussed this today, just a little while ago. I don't think that the Bible meant for anybody to think that, oh, if you're not following this book specifically, you're fucked.
Right.
I think that it's just meant to mean, you need to be operating under this higher moral compass, wherever that comes from, whether it be Judaism, Christianity later down the line, Islam, fucking paganism, whatever it is. I maybe not paganism, because I don't know specifically what they believe in. I haven't done a deep dive into the pagan religion, but it just whatever vessel gets you to that point of just trying to do better, trying to be a better person, and just trying to be better than you currently are. And I don't mean being nicer to people as in be a better person, be more generous or whatever. I just mean do better. At whatever it is that you're doing, like, do better. You can absolutely do better.
Yeah.
No matter what it is, you can improve. There's always room for improvement. Even the best person in the world at anything, like LeBron James, could still improve his game. Fucking Khabib Nurmagomedov could still become a better grappler. Floyd Mayweather could continue to hone in his boxing skills, even though he is like 40 and he's been doing it since he was a child. There's always room for improvement. So just try to improve.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you're following this book's version of getting to that point.
Right. So thebibleproject.com, they say, and this is them rationalizing God's vindictiveness and evil nature. I shouldn't say evil. That's probably get some people upset with me. I didn't mean evil. Okay. Given that mission, let's talk about the misguided idea that Joshua and the Israelites were motivated by the act of killing a people group. The conquest was more about ending the Canaanites' religious and cultural practices than ending their lives. The problem wasn't the people, but idolatry. Having said that, I still am frustrated with this interpretation, because as we'll kind of get to, in the story of destroying Jericho, they go in, they kill the children. They specifically state that they kill the children, the women, the old, the men, the ox, the goats, everything. They kill everything.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I want to talk about Job a little bit later, and that's another one where God doesn't only kill warriors and fighters. I mean, he slaughtered thousands of Job's animals and his whole family just to prove a point to Satan. Like, God does some fucked up shit. It's not all warriors and soldiers being killed. That is absolutely not the case. God you can be a little bit vindictive and almost unreasonably just mean in the Old Testament. Old Testament God is very, very harsh.
And if you're gonna have to believe, like, they have to rationalize it, because they have to believe that he's this sky daddy. If you're going to, in order for God to exist in the way, in the frame that they suggest he does, they have to rationalize these things. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
And so you think that these people are taking the idea of God literally as this person in the sky, and
Yes.
that's why
They
they are
have
trying to
to
rationalize
rationalize it.
this, because
Yeah.
they don't want to live in fear that they're being ruled by a malevolent God.
Right.
God.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that's the
Yeah.
prelude. So we'll kind of get into it. This is Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 5.
Deuteronomy, that's a good one. That one in Leviticus have some fun passages.
Yeah. God makes it clear to the Israelites that it is not because of your righteousness or your integrity that you are going in to take possession of their land, meaning Jericho and all of the Canaanites, but on account of the wickedness of these nations. I thought that was just an interesting thing. Not because of your righteousness and integrity. And I like that verse. But and it almost makes me think, if someone is acting malevolently and you stop them, the point is not for your righteousness, it's stop this malevolence.
Yeah, exactly. It's not so you can posture and say, like, yeah, I did this good thing. I am righteous for the way that I am behaving. It's literally just to stop the bad.
Yep.
Like, you don't need to milk it and fluff yourself up after you do something like that.
Yep.
It's not about your righteousness. It's about stopping wickedness
Yep.
and evil and just negative action.
Exactly. So we'll get into it. Crossing the Jordan. This is, I want to say Joshua verse 3, something like that. Okay. Crossing the Jordan. This is an interesting piece as well. So just before we get into it, the Ark of the Covenant. This is the Ark of the Covenant is the promise between God and the Israelites. It also holds the Ten Commandments. But he says, when you seek the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. And that's interesting, because I heard Jordan Peterson talking about faith and the fact that we are ignorant creatures, but still moving forward despite that ignorance is faith. And I really liked that description, because before I kind of thought of faith as like just believing that I could fly. If I can have faith that I can just fly if I need to. And it was an explanation that I didn't really care for, but this one I think adds to that.
Yeah, and I can relate to that, just in that when I was younger, faith to me always seemed silly. It's because my interpretation of it whenever I was younger was just that, well, if you ask God hard enough and you have faith
Right.
that he will help you, then yeah, anything's possible. You can do whatever you want as long as you just have faith in God and his will to help you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so the destruction of Jericho. So just to start, the city of Jericho, it's considered the city of palm trees and springs. And this is
Sounds lovely.
worth noting because it's surrounded by a vast desert of nothing. And this is also the first places the Israelites conquer in their going in and cleansing Canaan, or I guess that's the area you call it. Okay, so a few distinctions. They go in, and it starts, and 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. So before the promise of God, the covenant with God, they will do this. And this number 7 often means completeness, fullness, et cetera, et cetera. Trumpets are represented as like a wake-up call for the sinners. So that's why there's so much emphasis on the trumpets, I believe. So a wake-up call for the sinners. So they go in, let's see. Going to skip around. Now Joshua had commanded the people, saying, you shall not shout or make any noise with your voice, nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, shout, then you shall shout. I thought that was just worth noting, and I don't necessarily know how to interpret that right off the bat, but they must be in silence before they can do anything to further their efforts, I guess.
Will you read that one again?
Yes. Now Joshua had commanded the people, saying, you shall not shout or make any noise with your voice, nor shall a word proceed out of your mouth until the day I say to you, shout, then you shall shout. And Joshua in this instance he was the second hand to Moses, but he's essentially a prophet from God. He's the speaker through God. Mm-hmm. So blah, blah, blah. And then eventually, we'll kind of skip ahead. They march around the city 7 times. You can kind of look into the details if you find this interesting. And then the walls of Jericho collapse. And Joshua said to the people, after the seventh day and the seventh time that they went around in circles around the walls. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Now the city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction, it and all who are in it. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, she and all who are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that we sent. So Rahab was a harlot, and beforehand Joshua had sent in spies to scout the city, and she was a harlot that hid them and let them in and gave them information on the city. I find it interesting that in this, the story chooses to save only her, the harlot. Maybe we can come back to that, but
yeah,
an interesting distinction.
Maybe just off the top of my head, even though she was a harlot, maybe just it was redeeming enough that she helped them in their sacking of Jericho. So even the unrighteous, let's say, like, are not beyond saving so long as they veer towards the idea of following good.
Yeah.
Could just off the top of my head,
Yeah.
that would be my opening interpretation.
Definitely. Okay, and then kind of skipping all the way towards the end, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, ox and sheep and donkey, with the edge of the sword. Okay, and then the epilogue. Cursed be the man before the Lord who rises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay its foundation with his firstborn, and with his youngest he shall set up its gates. And then just continuing the epilogue, Achan is a guy, but the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. God had told them beforehand, take nothing from the city, essentially. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. And I guess I should have done this before, but so for some context, actually, okay, that's enough. So kind of going over that, what do you kind of take from that story? Or maybe I'll start if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, not at all.
It seems like the city of Jericho, the city of palm trees, is they're trying to make an artificial heaven almost similar to the Tower of Babel in a sense, but it's this artificial heaven that is not the true place, not the true heaven. That's, they don't give us a ton of details on it, and so that's like right off the top of my head, that's kind of what I think.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that because I was kind of struggling to come up with anything. Does it give any more details beyond any more pertinent details beyond what you outlined for us? Them circling the city and then the walls falling, don't take anything, the harlot is saved, kill everyone. Any more details about what's going on in the city or
hardly? So
how they're behaving?
This is as much background as I could find. So in Genesis 15, your descendants, this is talking to Abraham, I believe, your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. This is talking about the Israelites in Egypt and the Pharaoh, but in a land that is not theirs. Some more context, Deuteronomy 20. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not cities of the nations here, but in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded, that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. And I guess a little bit more context, they're practicing rituals and
worshiping false idols,
sacrificing children. They are doing these horrible things. But still, that doesn't make sense to me why we would go in and kill the children then.
Yeah, okay, so wiping out the women and the children, well, I mean, the women are adults, so there's some... They have responsibility that they can take for their actions. The women are not generally thought of as off limits for killing for the same reason as children.
Sure.
So as far as poor moral behavior goes, I think that's why the women weren't spared. The children potentially for the sake of just rooting out and eliminating any possible future uprising of similar behavior.
Yep.
Maybe.
Yep,
You know, get
definitely.
rid of everybody that this belief system has been instilled in. So I would say, yeah, I agree with your interpretation of that being almost similar to the Tower of Babel, in that they had created a false heaven, and they had created it specifically under the pretext of worshiping false idols, which, again, we more interpret as just not following the proper moral code, even if you maybe think you are.
Yep.
You know, you're worshiping these gods. You think you have found some system under which to operate, but it's incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it might just be about potentially finding groups of people, or even just people in general, that have begun to operate under false moral compasses and are actually doing a lot worse for the world than they believe they are, and doing something about that, regardless of who those people might be. That's a difficult one.
It's a tough one, especially because it's the irony and it's the inconsistency in the Bible. The New Testament is all about forgiveness.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's difficult. It's really difficult to interpret. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's an extremely tough one. I think just that's another one that at face value seems a little bit simple, but I feel like there's more to it than what I'm currently pulling away from it.
Right.
Part of it is probably about the worshiping of false idols and just eliminating people that aren't actually doing good, even though they think they are. But there's got to be more to it than that.
There's got to be more. Maybe we can revisit. I don't think I said on the podcast, but in revisiting the story of Abraham and Isaac, I wanted to talk about it on here, what I was telling you.
Yeah.
Telling you before we started. So last episode, we had talked about the story of Abraham and Isaac sacrificing his son. And in order to adhere to your highest moral compass and your highest principles, you'd have to do something as much as sacrificing your child. And that's kind of left us with, like, what's a real world kind of example of that now. And one that I kind of realized from watching some podcasts is that, let's take an example of you're a father and you're providing for your family, but you have some things going on at work that you don't agree with, you don't stand by, that you don't find are truly just. And you stand up and you're willing to say and speak out against those things. You're putting your job at risk, and in putting your job at risk, you're a provider, you're putting your family at risk. And you're willing to sacrifice the comfortability of your family for the highest principle of standing up for what is unjust. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really cool and good example of, like, a real world scenario where Abraham and Isaac could be used.
Definitely. Yeah, I think that helps expand upon the kind of the idea that we came to last time, where it's like the ability to sacrifice even that which is most important to you might need to come into play in order for you to actually be able to operate under this to do the right thing. I will just say, I think that's a really good example where you might have to do something that would risk the well-being of not only yourself but the people that you care about in order to just do the right thing. Whether it's you're being mistreated at work, or in a grander scheme of things, the way that your workplace is operating is hurting a lot of people for whatever reason, whether it's just making all of its employees miserable or it's got them operating under some sort of repressive doctrine. You might have to sacrifice your standing in that position, thus sacrificing your family's means of living, essentially, in order to just do the right thing, even though it might not be the smartest thing financially to do, or just from a survival standpoint, it is still the right thing to do.
It's also interesting to note that in reading it further, Isaac was Abraham's only, as I understand it, he was his only chance of his future, of Abraham's destiny of Abraham's lineage, Isaac, the one who he has to sacrifice, is his only chance of future. I think we have to be willing to sacrifice in adhering to our highest moral standard and compass and principles, sacrificing our future entirely in order to stand by those.
Yeah, or at least our current idea of what our future is supposed to be.
Right.
You know, and that could come into play in multiple different scenarios, whether it be like a job or leaving a shitty relationship, even. You know, like you might have this idea of what your future is laid out ahead of you, and you might need to just say, no, that seems like it's actually wrong now, and I've got to just eliminate that idea of what my future was going to be and make a better change.
Yeah, absolutely. I just farted pretty loudly, so that's why we're laughing. I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick.
We're very mature.
Cool. So that kind of wraps up our 2 stories for the day.
Sure.
Something I want to note about Solomon, the son of King David, and I heard this in a podcast today, and I just thought it was so cool, and it's just so interesting, and I want to study it more. But anyway, God says to Solomon, long story short, God says to Solomon, I'll give you anything you want, and any riches, anything you want. And Solomon is known as like the wise king. Solomon asked God for wisdom. And we can get into this. This can be the precursor to next week. But what's so interesting about that is in order to desire wisdom, you already have to have wisdom.
Yeah.
If you're going to seek wisdom, and that's imagine you could have all of the riches in the world and you don't ask for any of those things. You already have wisdom in asking for that.
Yeah.
Which we can kind of elaborate on further next week.
Definitely. Yeah, no, but I absolutely agree that I absolutely agree that in order to recognize the importance of wisdom, you definitely have to be wise already to a certain. It's almost like you have to have been
which came first,
set on that path. Yeah,
which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Exactly. Yeah, or how did it originally originate? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think wisdom is very correlated with either the Holy Spirit or with God in some sense.
How so with the Holy Spirit? That we've talked about how much we both struggle with that one.
The fact that where wisdom comes from is a mystery.
Yeah.
In a lot of instances, I guess. But maybe not. Maybe it's pretty explainable in that you have to go through struggles to attain wisdom. But I still think it's kind of a mystery, and that's why I relate it to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, I wonder if the Holy Spirit almost symbolizes our subconscious attraction to operating under that higher moral compass, and that might be what leads you down the path of wisdom, a subconscious guide towards just doing the right thing and being open and susceptible to that guidance towards that, higher mode of operation would make you more likely to be the type of person that would recognize that and say, yeah, I want more wisdom.
Right. Definitely. 100%. 100%. Sweet. Okay, so that kind of covers the religion. Do you want to pull out 2 cards? And we're at an hour in.
Let's do it.
Pull out a couple cards and go from here.
You go first this time.
Okay, I'll just pull out a random one and see what happens. So we have controversial, as they would say. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ.
That's a good one.
Holy fuck, bro. It's a very good one. Context real quick. I just want to drop the context in. This is a controversial card game. We didn't come up with these questions.
Oh, jeez.
Holy fuck. Okay. Would you support the use of realistic child sex dolls by pedophiles?
Gonna have to say no.
Okay.
People would definitely make the argument that, well, that would help keep kids safe, because they have this alternative. But I think that would more just kind of instill that perverted attraction in them.
It would normalize the activity of that.
It would normalize the activity within their subconscious. Yeah, it's like it. If you're a sex addict, watching porn is not what you need to do to kick that. You know, embracing your addiction is not the way to go about eliminating it. And that's what child sex dolls would be. Like, yeah, it's better than him actually fucking a kid, but what's the actual likelihood that is going to prevent him from fucking a kid, as opposed to just making him want the real thing more?
Yeah.
So I would say no.
If I were to get behind that, I would have to see right now data that supports regular sex dolls keeping rapists from raping people.
Sure.
If I saw a conclusive data that says because these rapists have sex dolls, they don't rape other people, I could get behind it more, because I think the net positive of it, like ultimately what you and I both want, no matter what, and what everyone else wants, as little and few kids being molested as possible. And so if that outcome made that happen, then I would support it. If that was the outcome, and I would need to see data that said conclusive, this is true.
Yeah, and I think that the data would probably show the exact opposite, you know, because with rapists, I know that generally the mentality is they it's more of a domination thing than an actual sexual drive thing. It's more about overpowering somebody and weak. So I don't think that a sex doll would satisfy that sick need and desire. And likewise, I don't think that pedophiles would be veered away from exploiting children if they were just, you know, halfway encouraged to participate in that behavior. Because I think likewise with people that victimize children, a lot of it is probably the fact that they are victimizing somebody. You know, I think that is part of the draw, at least for some of them. Maybe not. Maybe for some of them it is just a sexual attraction to people that's younger than them, and that's still not okay, but it's not as intentionally vicious. But I think that those intentionally vicious people definitely do exist as far as child predators go, so it's definitely not going to help them. And the ones that are just attracted to younger people, I think that giving them a halfway there way of expressing their sexual desire is probably just going to leave them wanting more of the real thing, and they're not going to be satisfied with it. And it might even cause more abuse in that regard.
Can I look something up on your laptop? I'm on Robert's laptop. I'm going to look up, do sex dolls keep rapists from raping? Is that okay to search?
Absolutely. Okay. If I'm going to end up on a list, it's already happened, man. It is so much unfiltered footage of me streaming and saying off the cuff shit.
So we'll give you this. This is probably where they got the question from. This is from the Australian Institute of Criminology. Finally, there is a risk that childlike dolls could be used to groom children for sex in the same way that adult sex dolls have already been used. There is no evidence that child sex dolls have a therapeutic benefit in preventing child sexual abuse. With that right there, I cannot get behind child sex dolls.
Yeah.
Okay, how about you pull one out and go from there? That was an interesting one, though. It's an interesting thought experiment.
We got controversial, intellectual, personal, and sad. Well, I don't want to do sad. Honestly, I'm feeling another controversy.
Okay.
Not that one. I'm not feeling that one. That one didn't feel right.
Yeah, feel it.
Feeling it out. All right. Is incest wrong? Should it be illegal?
I love this question. I love this question.
Love this question. All right, go for it.
Okay, well, let me take it away. This is my thought. This does not mean that this is the thought I'll have for the rest of my life. This is just a thought that I have. Okay, guys? Okay. Is incest wrong? For me, all of the arguments against incest are you could create an abomination of a human, to say it in not so nice terms. It's not natural. It's your blood. All of these things, and those are kind of all the main arguments against it. Is that fair? Or are there any more that I'm missing?
None that come to mind.
Okay. So
I would say, just to expand on the abomination thing, I don't think it's so much. I think the term abomination means that would imply that people expect like the immediate result of incest would be that an extremely fucked up child comes out, like a Cronenberg-esque monster, like The Thing comes out. But I think the main argument is just that you are not providing the potential offspring that you might create with the best chance of being as functionally sound as they could be. By mixing your own genes together, you are much more likely to create birth defects, which is the main. It doesn't have, I just think abomination implies that it's like a huge thing.
Sure.
I think that it's a more, we're worried about more subtle
okay.
problems.
And that's I'm with you on that. So that's where I'm going with that. Okay, so
and I figured that's what you meant. I just, for the sake of the fact that we are recording, I just to clear up what we mean by abomination.
Yep.
It doesn't have to be super severe.
Yep. Right. So for me for incest to be wrong consistently, it has to be parallel to other things. So what do I mean by that? Well, in the age of birth control, 90% of women in the modern world are on birth control, something to that effect. Assuming that you can have as much sex as you want without children, without the consequence of children, and that is very possible now. And in many ways, strong pullout game, etc., condoms, birth control, IUDs, whatever. If you're going to say that incest is wrong for these reasons, to me, in order for that opinion to be consistent, you would also have to say that homosexual sex is wrong. Because all of the reasons that people say that homosexual relationships are wrong, it's not natural, right? Like that's kind of the main one. It's not natural. So if you are accepting of homosexual relationships and sex, to keep it parallel, you would have to be, to me, accepting of incestual relationships, because the consequence of children is not there in the modern age. And so all of the other arguments, it's not natural, kind of go out the door if you accept homosexual relationships as well. So do I think incest is right or wrong, or it should be okay? Assuming that you can't have children, you won't have children, I'm not going to say that I'm personally an advocate for it, but I don't necessarily think it's morally wrong, I should say. I don't think that it's morally wrong.
Sure. And I might agree that it's not necessarily morally wrong. Like if you're, for whatever reason, like if you're attracted to your sibling, I don't think that makes you a bad person. I think it makes you strange. But I think that...
Why does it make you strange?
Just because, naturally speaking, people are supposed to be attracted to people with different genetics than them. It's again, it's not natural theory, but the difference, in my opinion, between homosexuality and incest in that specific regard is you are still going outside of your family's gene pool, even if you are attracted to somebody of the same sex. I don't at all really ascribe to the fact or to the idea that homosexuality is unnatural. I think that, like, just since we're on the topic of the Bible, generally speaking, there's the Leviticus line about, like, to lie with another man is an abomination or whatever. I don't think that was meant to be interpreted as being gay is wrong. I think that was put in there and probably mistranslated over thousands of years. But I think that was originally put in there as just a way of saying having sex with people of the same sex is not going to be fruitful for the advancement of the human race. You're not going to be creating people, which ultimately 2,000 years ago, making more people was a huge priority. The human race was not easily surviving that long ago. I mean, if you had a bad crop one year, you're dead. Like, we don't have a surplus of food at the grocery store that you can just go buy if your crops don't yield.
Even as early as the 1700s or 1800s.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the potato famine in Ireland. I mean, Jesus Christ, that's how my family ended up here, was 200 years ago. There was a famine that caused millions of people to flee Ireland because there just was not food. And if you stayed, you would have died, you know? So I think that the main point against homosexuality from a biblical standpoint is just it will not create more humans, and that's a problem. And I think from a similar token, the potential of creating offspring with a blood relative is also not going to long-term be beneficial for the furtherment of the human race, because eventually that is going to cause genetic defects. Maybe not after one generation of inbreeding. I think it does take a couple of generations, generally speaking, for birth defects to start showing up prominently. But long term, it's not going to work. And so I think that from a moral standpoint, or not even from a moral standpoint, but just from a technical standpoint, there is always the possibility of having a child with somebody of the opposite sex if you're having sex with them. Even if you use all the birth control in the world, it might fail. The condom might break. The birth control might just not work, whether it's a pill or an IUD. Sure, abortion is an option, but then we get into the discussion of whether or not that's morally okay.
Let's get into, okay, well, let's say there are two siblings are in love, and either the boy gets his tubes, not his tubes tied.
The man gets his tubes tied, and the woman gets a vasectomy.
Yeah. So the man, let's say the man, either the guy gets a vasectomy, or it's an incestual relationship where the woman is postmenopausal.
The woman's barren. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I would say, morally speaking, there wouldn't be an issue there.
Go for it.
I don't know if I'm going to sign off on going for it, just because my personal view on the matter is that beyond the possibility for birth defects and the fact that it's just, again, not natural from a genetic standpoint. You know, I disagree with the fact that homosexuality is unnatural. I mean, if you're attracted to men, I think that there's probably just some people that are born with some sort of genetic difference that might make them attracted to the same sex as opposed to the opposite sex. The same way that some people are born with, like, not to say that homosexuality is a disorder, but say like a depression disorder. It's, you know, some people are born wired differently than others, and that might be one way that people are born wired. And aren't people potentially that are in incestual relationships born wired that way? Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. And sure, maybe they are just wired that way, but again, I think that's where you cross the line from just abnormality to actual disorder, where it's like, okay, there is a line to be drawn, I think, you know.
So can I ask you this? Should society, we'll bring it into this, in the same way that society is accepting of homosexual relationships, should society be against incestual relationships, or should society be accepting of incestual relationships?
It's hard to say what I think society should think. I think that falls onto each individual person. You know, like you're within your rights to believe whatever you believe about it. I don't think that there's one opinion that you could have on this matter that's either correct or incorrect. You know, it's just my personal opinion is that I would look down on it morally, and for this reason, really more than any other, it's just fucking lazy. You can't even get out of your own house and fucking go meet somebody. You're just gonna fuck your sister. Come on, man. What are we doing? I mean, I wouldn't say that. Really, the most important thing for me is the potential for the creation of offspring that will potentially not live quality lives because you have birthed them with disorders based on the fact that you created them via incest. But I personally, if I see an incestuous relationship, I think it's weird. It's off-putting. It's uncomfortable. I think that's just not right. I don't know if you've been following the Island Boys situation at all lately. Are you familiar with what's happening
I
there?
just know that they kissed each other maybe or something, or what's
They've created an OnlyFans that is based around incestuous content. Whenever I first heard about the subject, I think it was Sensitive Society on YouTube was talking about it, and he had a brief little clip of the little preview for one of their videos that they like put on Instagram or something, and they fucking tongue kissed each other. And as soon as I saw that, I was just like, oh no, like instant uncomfortability.
Oh
right?
yeah. I mean, the fact that so many layers to that. The fact that they're twins. The fact that they're yeah.
And it's, I've seen two men kiss each other plenty of times, and it doesn't invoke that kind of reaction in me. I just naturally, it doesn't cause any kind of discomfort or feeling of like, what is happening right now? What is this? It's just like, yeah, okay, it must be dating. Whereas when it becomes incestuous, that's where I naturally start feeling like this is fucked up. And maybe I don't know where exactly that comes from, but I think that it's probably just a natural reaction to something that is not genetically sound. It's not something you're supposed to be doing.
I get that. I could imagine 20 years down the line or 40 years down the line where as homosexuality was slowly introduced to society as being acceptable, if in a scenario where incestuous relationships were in the similar sense accepted into society, someone like, or you 40 years down the line, let's say at this age, like a new you or whatever, could look at that and not
like
be as
this age in 40 years.
Yeah. And you had been brought up under the
over
same
the last 20
of incestuous relationships being acceptable, where you would not cringe as much.
I don't know, because I don't really recall at any point like it being hammered into my head that incestuous relationships were wrong. Like that's not really a prominent topic of discussion. You don't really discuss that very much. You don't hear it being discussed.
Well, it's
very
taboo.
much.
It's always been taboo.
Sure, it's taboo, but that's not really thrown in your face so much. Like the fact that it's taboo is not often made apparent. It's just when it comes up, it is thought of as taboo, so it is there, it is taboo, but it's not an issue that comes up very often, so it's not something that's been like hammered home to me at any point. The same thing with homosexuality, like I wasn't raised being told that it was okay or not okay. Like it didn't really come up, and I just kind of adopted the idea that it's fine, even though I spent a lot of time around like kids in school that would make gay jokes all the time. Like, oh, it's so essentially that would be instilling into you the idea that being gay is something to be laughed at and made fun of. But I still didn't adopt that. I don't think that. So I'm not sure if it comes from anywhere specifically in my upbringing that I think it's taboo. Maybe it is, and it's likely that it is some subconscious, instillment of that idea in my head that incest is taboo. But it's not a very common issue that comes up. It's not talked about very much. So I don't really think of it as something that I have a strong moral conviction for any particular reason. I can very easily point at my like Second Amendment rights beliefs and say, well, yeah, like I was raised by a gun owner who had me around guns my whole life. He taught me about gun safety, and they've just been a part of my whole life. So of course I like guns, and I think that we should be allowed to have them. That makes sense. I've been conditioned that way. If I was raised by an anti-gun liberal, I would probably be very anti-gun. But my dad, neither of my parents or any of my friends or my family members ever really brought up the fact that incest is wrong at any point. It's just kind of a natural guttural reaction for me whenever I see it. It's just like, And I guess I can only think of this one recent example. But I think that speaks to the fact that it's not a very prominent issue. This is the first time it's ever come up in my in my life,
sure,
really, where it's at the forefront of anything.
I could see the fact that it's not being brought up. Like, the things that we don't bring up are intuitively understood that they are wrong. Which is fucking fascinating, because taboo, or just on the topic of what's taboo, talking about money with other people is considered taboo. And and under that same thought process, like, making money is wrong almost. Like, we almost subconsciously, I don't know. That's a thought for another time. But yeah, okay. Well, that's an interesting one.
That's a fun way to end it.
Cool. So I think we've kind of burned everything we could on this. Any last final thoughts?
None really come to mind. No, I think this was good. I think we can probably evolve on a little bit of what we talked about today on the next episode. And I think I am going to look a little bit more into Job before the next episode, because I did want to build off of that a little bit based on the Tower of Babel, just because, like I said, on my way over here, I was just thinking about how petulant God was being in the story of the Tower of Babel. And then that got me thinking about the story of Job naturally, because, like, fuck. Come on, God.
Man, that's a tough
bargaining a man's life away because Satan said you wouldn't, or that
he pimped him out.
Yeah, because Satan said, "Oh, he won't like you if you fuck him over." So God said, "Okay, bet."
Say less.
Say less.
We should do
just
modern Bible.
transcription, modern Bible transcription.
Yeah, that'd be a hilarious idea. God's being like, say less.
Yeah. And
say
God,
less.
and so God said, "Say less." And Job said, "I have not lost faith in God. No cap, for real, for real,
for real, for real. On God, I'm a day one.
On God, I'm day one."
All right, cool. Well, that's a wrap, and we'll see you on the next one.
Absolutely, we will.